Greetings, my name is Casey Lipschutz. I'm the Education Coordinator at the Historical Society of Palm Beach County. It is our mission to collect, preserve, and share the rich history of Palm Beach County. We have over 4 million photographic images, maps, periodicals, journals, architectural drawings, and research files. Our main draw is the Richard and Pat Johnson Palm Beach County History Museum. We're located on North Dixie Highway in the historic 1916 courthouse. Today, I will be discussing the ancient people of South Florida. Enjoy. Let's begin when the first people began to arrive on the peninsula over 12,000 years ago. These hunter-gatherers, known as Paleo Indians, migrated south in search of food and fresh water. During the Pleistocene epoch, the oceans were several hundred feet lower than they are today, and Asia and Alaska were connected by a bridge of dry land more than 1,000 miles wide. Exactly when humans crossed Beringia is still a matter of discussion. Artifacts, such as the distinctive spear point of Paleo Indians, made it possible to identify migration routes, which mirrored the activity of megafauna, including mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths. The Cutler Fossil Site, one of the most archaeologically significant sites in the eastern United States, is located on Deering Estate in Miami-Dade County. It contains the fossilized remains of extinct ancient animals and early inhabitants. Incredibly, these remains date back approximately 10,000 years. Would you believe that prior to the discovery of the Cutler Fossil Site, most scientists thought human habitation in Florida dated back only 4,000 years? There are several reasons why life changed for the Paleo Indians. The Pleistocene period lasted until about 11,700 years ago, which marked the ending of the last glacial period and the beginning of the Archaic Period. Wide-scale melting of ice sheets caused the sea levels to rise and inundate large areas. The climate was wetter due to higher levels of precipitation. The term archaic generally refers to non-agricultural people who survived by hunting, gathering, and fishing, who once flourished across large parts of North America as a result of these environmental changes. Archaic people gathered plant foods and incorporated a wider range of faunal resources into their diet than their Paleo-Indian counterparts. Populations became more sedentary over time. The crude stone tools of the Ice Age Paleo-Indians were replaced with atlatls, fishhooks, nets, baskets, and the bow and arrow. Pottery of clay and steatite, a type of rock known as soapstone, was introduced as well. Changes in cultural characteristics, including language, religion, and ceramic styles, marked the beginning of the Malabar period, which lasted until the 16th century. By the time the Malabar period ended, the first European explorers started arriving in Florida. These explorers provided us with the first written accounts of contact with the natives, marking the beginning of the historic period. Fortunately, as a result of archaeological discoveries, we've gained a more accurate view of how the natives lived, instead of relying solely on the discriminatory Eurocentric perspective. Let's learn about an important archaeological clue that gave us insight into the lives of the first tribes, shell mounds. The remains of shellfish, turtle, deer, and other animal bones were tossed into piles or mounds. These mounds are sometimes called kitchen middens. However, not all mounds are kitchen or shell middens. A midden generally refers to shell deposits, and mounds were usually used for burials. At times, burials were placed within shell middens. Archaeologists sometimes found items that originated in Europe. This tells us that they traded with the European explorers or collected items when ships wrecked along Florida's coast. Let's take a look at one of the most significant shell mounds located in Palm Beach County. It's situated across from Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse. Amazingly, it was originally 600 feet long, 20 feet high, and possibly 6,000 years old. To put this in perspective, the Great Pyramids of Egypt are 4,000 years old. This means that ancient tribes were living near the Jupiter Inlet before the pyramids were built. Artifacts discovered here include axe heads, plummets, fiber-tempered pottery, and bone-handled toothbrushes. One of the most exciting discoveries was of a faceted chevron bead. This is proof of the earliest explorations to the New World. On top of the mound is the Du Bois House, which was built in 1898. It is located in Du Bois Park, and it is open to the public. When Spanish and French explorers began arriving in Florida in the 16th century, they encountered several tribes. The Pensacola, Apalachee, and Timucua tribes lived in northern Florida. The Tocobaga and Jororo tribes lived in central Florida. The Ayi, Jeaga, and Miami, Tequesta, and Calusa made their homes in southern Florida. Lastly, the Matecumbe lived in the Florida Keys. It is interesting to note that these tribal names were not entirely authentic, having been fabricated by foreign explorers. What was their culture like? Let's find out. The Tequesta lived in the area south of present-day Palm Beach County to southern Miami-Dade County in southeast Florida. By the time of European exploration in the 1500s, the main Tequesta village was located near the mouth of the Miami River, where it flows into Biscayne Bay. They built camps and villages along rivers, streams, inlets, and on barrier islands. They were hunter-gatherers and did not practice agriculture, and who most likely lived in palm-thatched homes. Men and women wore clothing of animal skins, woven grass, or Spanish moss. Their diet included deer, alligator, fish, and turtles. From the ocean, the Tequesta gathered oysters, clams, conchs, lobsters, and crayfish. They also collected plants, nuts, and wild berries. Are you aware that in 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon encountered the Tequesta at the mouth of the Miami River? He stopped at a bay called Tequesta, now Biscayne Bay, during his exploration of the Florida coast. Over 50 years later, the governor of Florida, Pedro Menendez de Avilés, established a Jesuit mission at the main village to convert the native people to Christianity. It was not surprising the mission failed when the Spanish and Tequesta began fighting. What is the Miami Circle? Why is it important? The 1800 to 2,000-year-old Miami Circle was discovered in 1998 when archaeologists were conducting investigations ahead of the construction of a multi-story apartment complex. This complex structure is significant for several reasons. First, it proves the considerable size of the Tequesta tribe. Second, it demonstrates the impact they had on the area. Third, it shows active trading with northern tribes occurred. The circle has 24 large holes and many smaller holes carved into the limestone bedrock. The diameter of the circle measures 38 feet. Ceramics, animal bones, shells, and stone axes were part of the approximately 143,000 items discovered in the circle area. Additional items that may have been placed in or buried under the structure were a complete 5-foot-long shark skeleton aligned east to west, a dolphin skull, and a complete carapace of a sea turtle. The Miami Circle may have been a council house or some form of ceremonial structure. The Jeaga and the Hobe, a subgroup of the Jeaga, lived along the Atlantic coast from Jupiter to southern Palm Beach County. The remains of some of their villages have been found at Jupiter Inlet, Loxahatchee River, and in Riviera Beach. The native population of Palm Beach County was a non-agricultural people who hunted and gathered their food. The Jeaga's diet included game animals. They also caught fish, shellfish, snakes, turtles, and sharks. The Jeaga gathered cocoa plums, sea grapes, palmetto berries, and roots. For clothing, the men wore breechcloths of woven grass or animal skins, while the women may have used Spanish moss to create skirts. The men were described as wearing their hair tied in a roll behind their head with 2 bones stuck in the hair in the shape of a broad arrow and the other a spear. Their homes were simple structures built on high ground or on shell middens. Interestingly enough, during special ceremonies, they drank a dark, strong, hot tea-like drink to purify themselves called casina. It was also known as the black drink. Only men were allowed to have the black drink, which made them vomit to cleanse themselves. Casina was made from roasted and boiled yaupon holly leaves and served in a shell cup. There were no deposits of useful chert, a type of hard, dark, and opaque rock, so the Jeaga used wood, bone, and shell to furnish tools. Large shells such as the conch were made into dippers, cups, and hammers. Parts of the shell were used as an adze, celts, or shell beads. Woodworkers made bowls and other objects from pine and cypress trees. Shark teeth were used for cutting and carving. The teeth would be mounted on wood or bone handles and used like a knife or drill. In addition to artifacts, we learned about the Jeaga in a different way. In 1696, the Jeaga captured the passengers and crew of the English shipwrecked Reformation along the east coast of Florida. The Reformation was traveling from Jamaica to Philadelphia when it was caught up in a storm and shipwrecked just north of present-day Jupiter. The Jeaga held them for several weeks before they were released to journey 230 miles to reach safety at St. Augustine. During their travel north along the east coast of Florida, the Englishmen encountered a variety of native people. One passenger, Jonathan Dickinson, wrote a journal describing the land and the natives they met. It was the first English account of Florida's native people and description of how they lived. The Calusa lived on the southwest coast of Florida near the Caloosahatchee River, which means river of the Calusa. The Spanish conquistadors described them as warlike. That is how they were named Calusa, which means fierce people. The Spanish explorers, led by Juan Ponce de Leon, were intent on forcibly conquering the new land they had found. As a result, they became the target of attacks. The Calusa were notorious for poisoning their weapons with a toxic plant. Juan Ponce de Leon was injured by a poisoned spear and later died as a result. They made their stilt-styled homes on the shores and islands of the estuaries, marshes, bays, and rivers of southwest Florida. The Calusa used dugout canoes to travel their watery world. It is interesting to note they dug miles of canals across islands and marshes to make travel and trade easier and safer. Calusa canoes were made from hollowed-out cypress logs, and incredibly, they were known to travel as far as Cuba. Mound Key in Estero Bay was the center of the Calusa domain. It was where the paramount chief, or cacique, lived and ruled. The Calusa tribe controlled most of southwest Florida, and from time to time ruled over the Tequesta on the southeast coast, the Marecumba of the Florida Keys, and the Jeaga. Have you ever heard of Key Marco? It is an extraordinary archaeological site next to Marco Island, Florida, that provided invaluable clues to our understanding of Calusa ceremonialism and daily life. Among numerous mounds and ridges of earth and shell, archaeologists discovered a courtyard submerged in mud and bound by walls of conch shells. Scientists drained and cleared the courtyard, exposing house posts, fishing nets, shell tools, bowls, drinking vessels, weapons, and extraordinary wooden masks and animal figureheads. These artifacts were significant for three reasons. First, the preserved wood was thousands of years old. Second, the intricacy of the artifacts was unmatched by neighboring tribes. Third, it showed depth of culture. In the mid-16th century, 13-year-old Escalante Fontaneda was captured and held captive by the Calusa when Fontaneda was shipwrecked in the Florida Keys. Incredibly, Fontaneda was held for 17 years before being rescued by Europeans. His 1575 memoir, Memoria de las Cosas y Costa y Indios de la Florida, is one of the most valuable contemporary accounts of tribal life from that period. Let us imagine a time 2,500 years ago, around Lake Okeechobee. The prehistoric people of the Belle Glade culture area, known as the People of the Water, thrived in an area that enveloped the Kissimmee River Valley north to Lake Kissimmee. They developed subsistence strategies that were highly adapted to a world where canoes were the predominant means of transportation. It is believed the longest prehistoric canal system in North America was constructed in the Belle Glade culture area. The hand-dug Ortona canals, located just north of the present-day Caloosahatchee River, allowed canoes following the river to reach a large prehistoric settlement and earthwork complex. Amazingly, it was over 3 miles in total length. Their material culture was characterized by a unique settlement system of earthworks, mounds, and canals. They made hunting and fishing tools from bone, shell, and wood. A vast variety of fish, fowl, mammals, deer, reptiles, and amphibians assured ample calories, although rising and falling water tables shifted hunting and fishing strategies from season to season. How did we learn about this unique culture? Let's find out. The Belle Glade Mounds, a 2-mound site consisting of a habitation mound and a burial mound, is located near the southeast shore of Lake Okeechobee. These treasure troves of archaeological artifacts date to between 700 and 1500 AD. They were first excavated in the 1930s. During excavation, it was found that this site had unique artifact characteristics that were different from other sites. The name of the culture was taken from the nearby city of Belle Glade. The habitation mound measured about 10 feet high and was made of discarded shells, bones, broken pottery, and other items. Opposite the habitation mound, about 100 yards away, was a circular burial mound. Archaeologists recovered carved wooden artifacts that included animals, heads of birds, paddles, pestle plaques, and 2 human effigies. European objects were excavated from the uppermost level of the burial mound. These items included gold, silver, and copper beads, an iron spike, a lead pennant or plummet, several Spanish olive jar fragments, and numerous glass beads. Big Mound City, an ancient earthwork rarely seen in South Florida, is located in Palm Beach County, east of Lake Okeechobee. Covering 143 acres, Big Mound City consists of at least 23 mounds, including 2 or more pinewood flats. The intricate geometric arrangements of earthworks were made of yellow and white sand, except for a platform that contained extensive midden remains. Other platforms probably served to raise temples and residences above frequent flooding. This remarkable remnant of the past is protected by Florida Fish and Wildlife. Fort Center, named after a fort from the Second Seminole War, is a complex of earthwork mounds, linear embankments, middens, and circular ditches. It's considered to be the oldest center of Belle Glade culture, dating back to 450 BC. The visible earthworks occupy an area that is about 1 mile long and half a mile wide. One of the most unusual examples of native architecture ever created was the mortuary complex. The complex included a chevron-shaped earthen berm with rounded ends, a terrace for elite residences, a pond, a sacred garden for growing corn, a conical mound veneered with shells, a mortuary temple, and a wooden platform for funerals. This platform eventually collapsed and was discovered during underwater excavations. You may be surprised to learn that a secondary burial or double funeral was a common cultural practice. This was thought to alter the spiritual condition of the deceased. Remains were buried to decompose, later unearthed, put into jars, and finally placed on the platform. It is interesting to note that the Fort Center population may have enjoyed superior health compared to other populations in the region because of a better diet and freedom from arduous physical activity. It has been speculated that the site represented a high-status community. There are other mounds still needing investigation. One, west of Boynton, is in such a position as to be impossible to access for most of the year. Protected by moccasins, rattlesnakes, and alligators, the water table variances only allow for short excavations. At times, archaeologists have had to abandon their equipment when the water table rose overnight, making it impossible to reach the site. Within 250 years of Juan Ponce de Leon's exploration of the Florida coastline, the early tribes were gone. The native population of nearly 100,000 was decimated due to disease, warfare, and slavery. They were replaced by groups from Georgia and Alabama, known generally as Seminoles. Thanks to archaeological discoveries, we can peer through a more accurate lens and create a clearer picture of how the native populations lived. Our past is our cultural heritage, and the importance of how we choose to use this information for future generations should not be understated. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, you can contact me directly at the email address below. If you'd like to find out more about us, here is our web address. You can also find us on Facebook. I'd like to thank Rose Guerrero, our Director of Research, for her archaeological expertise and input. I would also like to thank the Mandel Library for inviting us to participate. Take care.